Hi guys, Matt Easton here. So I recently put up a video talking about antique swords and where to buy them, and talking a bit about my antique sword collecting obsession and so on. And one of the questions, in fact several people asked the same question, was about books that they could start to read to get the knowledge to build up enough sort of base kind of foundation knowledge so that they could go and buy antique swords without the fear of buying crap or fakes or whatever. Well, the first thing I should say is it's a very involved and big topic, and really it's good. This is good news in a way. There's a lot to learn, okay? And if you like learning and you're very interested in antique swords, the good news is there is a ton of stuff to learn. And you know, those of us who've been collecting for, I've been collecting for 20 years, but I know people who've been collecting for 40 and 50 years, and they're still learning. We're continually learning. And what's interesting is, essentially, the people who are collecting are often the experts on the subject, and they're usually the people who go on to write books about it. I'm writing a book about a certain type of antique sword at the moment, and people I know who are big-time collectors, they have, some of them have published books also, and certainly many of them have published articles either online or in magazines. So the good thing about being a very kind of narrow-minded collector is you become the expert on that subject, and you can write books about it, and you're the person that people refer to in the future, which is fantastic. It means, you know, it's good fun, and it means that your knowledge can be passed on to future generations. In terms of how to start acquiring the knowledge for collecting antique swords, part of it depends on what type of antique swords you're particularly interested in, and very clearly there have been specialist books written on special groups of swords. So for example, if you want to collect American Civil War swords, there are books on American Civil War swords. Just go on Amazon and start doing some searching. I would also recommend you look on ABE Books as well, because ABE Books has a lot of out of print and antiquarian books that you can't necessarily find on Amazon, and sometimes you can find them on ABE Books much more affordably than you can find them on Amazon. So really just decide what most interests you and start Google searching it. There are two websites I would highly recommend that you sign up to and start reading if you're interested in learning a lot about it. If you go to Sword Forum, that's Sword Forum International, it has a dedicated antique military sword collecting parts to it, sub-forum. It also has sections for kukris and Middle Eastern and Indian swords and other bits, so it's got various sub-forums for whichever is the bit you want to learn about. But really there are a lot of very, very knowledgeable collectors, and some of the very people in fact who write the books about it do write and respond to threads on Sword Forum. And the other one to look at is oldswords.com. Old Swords is a great resource. I would say it's more for British antique British sword collectors like me, because it's run by a British guy, and a lot of the swords and the information on there relates to British swords. However, it does have a lot of stuff about US swords, French swords, German swords and other. So basically sign up to oldswords.com and also Sword Forum International. Now in terms of books, I've found when I was growing up, before these websites were necessarily around or didn't have as much information on them yet, I actually started off with buying these collector's guides. They are called, there we go, let's get the reflection, the Lyle Official Arms and Armour Review, and this is the earliest one I've got, 1976. I'm not sure if that's the year that they started, but I've never been able to find an earlier one than this. And I've actually got all of the militaria ones, and this is, you'll notice this is specifically for arms and armour. So Lyle do actually publish general antique guides, but this is specifically the arms and armour one. And you can find copies of these. Obviously they're from the 70s and 80s and in fact into the 90s. And I've got all of them up till 1983, and then they published another one in the 1990s. And I bought all of them that I can. They're usually not expensive because there's not a huge number of people trying to get hold of them. They're fairly fringe interest, and they're old. If you try and get hold of those, they're brilliant. They actually have, I'll just show you inside. So the first thing you have to ignore is the prices. This one happens to be showing pistols, there we go. But underneath every picture, and although they are only black and white, they do have some colour pictures, but although they're only black and white pictures, you can start to familiarise yourself with the different patterns, the different models, and the different, you know, the different things out there that there are to collect. They do have prices with them, and I have to say the prices from the 70s and 80s are quite hilarious. I wish you could still buy antique swords for as cheap as some of them here. If we just go to, here we go, here's some basket-hilted Highland swords, broadswords, £32, £55. Yeah, I wish. These are like, these would be about at least 5 times the value now. But anyway, the point is that you get information underneath every sword, usually a blade length. So you start to learn about the different models of sword, and these are really, really good things. So the Lyle Official Arms and Armour Reviews, and they run from 1976 till 1983 continuously every year. And then I think there's a couple in the 1990s. I've certainly got one from the 90s, but I don't have it with me at the moment. If you're specifically interested in British swords, this is the Bible. I've actually done a review of this before, but this is Swords of the British Army by Bryan, Robson, and you can get this from Amazon or various other reputable booksellers. You can get old copies of it, but they tend to be more expensive than the new copies, and it's got the same information in. So this is basically the Bible for learning about the regulation models of British antique sword. And most recently is, again for British sword collectors, is the British Cavalry sword written by Richard Deller, and this is kind of the new Bible specifically of cavalry, British cavalry swords, and this has got even more information and more up-to-date information and more pictures than Bryan Robson. If you've got a general interest, I recommend you get Bryan Robson's book first, and then save up for Richard Deller's book to get later on if you're still interested and want to learn more. Finally, I would say there are a lot of fairly old books written in the 60s and 70s just on antique swords in general. And again, this comes down to searching on Amazon, eBay. eBay is very good for old books, and ABE books. Just searching for whatever you can find. And this is by Robert Wilkinson Latham. And this book's a bit out of date now, but it's got some nice pictures in it, it's got some nice information. Some of the information's a bit wrong, and we now know updated versions of it, but still, once you've got the up-to-date books and you know the correct information, the old books can still be really useful to you, because in your mind when you're reading it you know which bits need to be updated or corrected, but it's still got lots of useful information. And there are lots and lots of books published basically between mostly in the 1950s and 60s, but into the 70s and 80s and well to some extent, on antique swords. And I would just say, obviously I mostly talk about British antique swords because that's what I collect, but there are books like that on, you know, Imperial German swords, on Nazi swords, on French swords, on American. There's lots of books on American swords, so just go out there and start searching. Good luck, guys!